My name is Ava Langston, and at 52 years old, I have lived most of my life beneath the sprawling oaks and humid skies of Savannah, Georgia. If anyone had asked me how I pictured the day my only daughter graduated from Spelman College, I never would have guessed what actually happened. Sometimes life has a way of showing you exactly who people really are when you least expect it. And sometimes that revelation comes at the most inappropriate moment imaginable. We had reserved a private dining room at L'Atelier, an elegant French restaurant on Broughton Street, complete with gold chandeliers, crisp white linens, and the kind of hushed atmosphere that makes you sit a little straighter and speak in reverent tones. Nearly 50 of our closest friends and family members filled the room that afternoon, all there to celebrate Sophia's remarkable achievement. Friends from our church had driven over from different parts of the city, extended family had traveled from Macon and Charleston, and neighbors I'd known since elementary school had all gathered to honor my daughter's graduation from one of the most prestigious historically black colleges in the nation. Sophia looked absolutely radiant in her pale blue dress and graduation cap, her face glowing with pride and accomplishment. I sat beside her at the long table, my hand resting on hers, feeling overwhelmed with maternal pride as the warm summer light filtered through the restaurant's tall windows. At the other end of the table sat my husband Elliot, the man I had loved and lived with for 26 years, the father of my precious daughter, the person I had built my entire adult life around. As the celebration reached its peak, Elliot stood up slowly, his movement causing the conversations around the table to gradually quiet. Everyone turned their attention toward him, expecting to hear a father's heartfelt toast to his daughter's success. He raised his wineglass, and I noticed his wedding ring catching the light as he prepared to speak. What came out of his mouth next would forever change not only my life, but the lives of everyone in that room. I've decided to start a new life. Without Ava, he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence. For a moment, the entire world seemed to stop. Someone's hand slipped, and I heard the distinctive sound of crystal glasses clinking together. Even the restaurant servers, who had been moving gracefully between tables, froze in place. I felt the eyes of every single person in that room land on me, waiting for the dramatic response they expected, screaming, crying, shouting, perhaps even throwing something across the table. But there was none of that. Elliot's glass trembled slightly in his hand as he waited for me to crack, to give him the explosive reaction he was clearly anticipating. Instead, I calmly smoothed my napkin, stood with as much dignity as I could muster, and reached into my purse for a cream-colored envelope I had been carrying for months. I placed the envelope directly in front of him on the table. "This is a gift for you," I said, my voice clear, steady, and louder than I had intended. Sophia's eyes widened with shock and confusion, her lips trembling as she tried to process what was happening. She still wore her graduation cap, though it had shifted, slightly crooked during the commotion. I leaned down, kissed her cheek gently, and whispered, "I'm proud of you, baby. This is your day. Don't let anyone steal it from you." I straightened up and faced the crowd of people who had been part of our lives for decades. These were the same people who had eaten gumbo at our dining room table, who had laughed on our front porch during Christmas gatherings, who had shared our joys and sorrows for years. None of them could meet my eyes now, and I realized with a sinking heart that they already knew about Elliot's betrayal. They had known about him and the young woman he thought he was hiding, and they had said nothing to me. I gave the room one last composed smile and told everyone to please continue enjoying themselves. Then walked out of the restaurant with my head held high, my heels echoing on the marble floor. When the door closed behind me, I exhaled for the first time in weeks, feeling a strange mixture of relief and devastation. The oppressive Georgia heat hit me like a physical force as I stepped onto the sidewalk, but I didn't flinch. I welcomed it, let it wash over me like a baptism into my new reality. Before I had taken 10 steps down the street, I heard Elliot burst through the restaurant door behind me, calling my name with a voice that pitched upward in desperation. I didn't answer, didn't turn around, just kept walking down the stone steps, toward the street, my purse gripped tightly in my hand. Inside that purse was a second envelope containing divorce papers and a thick stack of evidence I had spent months meticulously collecting. The truth was, I had known about Elliot's affair for a very long time. It had started one cold January morning when I was organizing our financial records for the new year. While going through our bank statements and credit card bills, I spotted a charge at an expensive jewelry store in Atlanta. Elliot hadn't bought me jewelry since our 20th wedding anniversary, and my blood ran cold as I stared at the transaction. Over the following days and weeks, More suspicious charges appeared on our accounts. Dinners at upscale rooftop restaurants. Hotel stays in cities Elliot had never mentioned visiting. Expensive gifts that never made their way into our home. Kept quiet about my discoveries. Carefully tracking every suspicious transaction, and building a comprehensive record of his deception. Then one evening, I found his tablet lying open on the kitchen table, his text messages glowing on the screen. Her name was Jasmine, a woman half my age who had once laughed at my jokes during church picnics and social gatherings. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I made strategic appointments. My longtime friend from Delta Sigma Theta, Caroline Owens, had become one of the top divorce attorneys in Savannah. In her sun-filled office overlooking the historic district, I slid a thick folder of evidence across her polished desk. She barely blinked as she reviewed the documentation. "Let's take a look at your prenuptial agreement," she said matter-of-factly. Elliot had insisted on the prenup years earlier when I had a better job and more personal savings than he did. I remembered hating the very idea of it, feeling like it was a betrayal of trust and love. Now, ironically, it had become my shield and protection. The clause was crystal clear. Adultery meant I would retain the house, the bank accounts, and the investment portfolio. For months, I had tracked Elliot's every move. Every time he claimed he was working late at the office, I filed away receipts and incriminating emails. I even hired Ronnie, my brother's old college roommate who had become a private investigator, to gather photographic evidence. He brought me pictures of Elliot and Jasmine together on Tybee Island, checking into a boutique hotel under assumed names. I didn't plan elaborate revenge or dramatic confrontations. I simply wanted the truth documented and ready, knowing that Elliot would eventually try something theatrical. Caroline had advised me to wait until after Sophia's graduation ceremony. I wanted my daughter to have her moment of triumph, but I also suspected that Elliot would want an audience for whatever he was planning. He had always been drawn to dramatic gestures. I had tucked that envelope into my purse that morning, prepared for exactly what transpired. I let him have his moment, and when he took it, I left him with the legal papers, walked out with my dignity intact, and didn't look back. Elliot's footsteps thundered behind me as I turned the corner, finally stopping under the striped awning of a flower shop. He caught up to me, frantically waving the envelope I had given him. "Ava, what is this?" His voice was ragged with panic and confusion. I kept my face completely calm, my voice steady. "I'm just giving you what you worked so hard for." He ripped the envelope open with trembling hands, reading the first page of the divorce papers. His face went from red with anger to white with shock as the reality of his situation began to sink in. "How did you can't use this against me? The prenup expired years ago." I shook my head slowly. "Read it again, Elliot. Clause 14, never expires." I watched his face as the full truth finally set in. All the color drained from his cheeks as he realized what he had lost. But what about the investments? What about the house? I looked at him with something approaching pity. "You're looking at a whole new life, Elliot. You and Jasmine can start fresh in a rented apartment." He stared at me with the expression of a man who had just realized he had destroyed everything that mattered. "You're destroying me," he whispered. I almost laughed at the irony. "No, Elliot. You did that to yourself." A taxi stopped at the curb beside us. I got in, gave the driver my cousin's address, and left my husband standing there on the sidewalk, clutching his crumpled dreams and the legal papers that would reshape his entire future. I didn't cry during that ride across town. I just felt an overwhelming sense of relief, like something impossibly heavy had been lifted from my shoulders after years of carrying it around. That night, I drove back to our house in the Victorian district one last time. It glowed beautifully, in the amber light of the street lamps, but suddenly felt unfamiliar and strange, like a place I had visited in a dream. I had been home for less than an hour when Elliot came pounding on the front door, still holding the envelope containing his divorce papers. I opened the door just enough to see his face, which looked wild and desperate. "We need to talk," he said, his voice breaking. I stepped back and let him into the house, but kept an emotional wall firmly between us. He paced around the living room, talking rapidly about Jasmine, about how he never meant for any of it to happen, about the possibility of starting over and rebuilding our marriage. I let him talk without interruption, then told him flatly, "You have 48 hours to move out. After that, the locks will be changed." He collapsed onto the edge of the couch, burying his face in his hands. "Sophia doesn't know about any of this, does she?" he asked, his voice breaking with shame. Not yet, I replied. But she will. And you'll be the one to explain why you turned her graduation celebration into a disaster. He covered his face completely, and I watched the man I had once trusted completely break down in my living room. I felt nothing but cold detachment. The decision had been made long ago. I left for my cousin's house outside of Savannah that same night, where I stayed with Naya, who welcomed me with sweet tea and no uncomfortable questions. I sent Sophia a simple text message, "I love you. I'll explain everything when you're ready." She came to see me the next morning, her eyes tired but burning with a mixture of anger and sadness. She listened to my explanation without interruption, then hugged me tightly, her shoulders shaking with emotion. Over the following days, word spread throughout our social circles. People called with questions, gossip grew and multiplied, but I kept my head held high and my dignity intact. Elliot called repeatedly, begged through voicemails, sent text messages full of apologies, and had flowers delivered to my cousin's house. I didn't respond to any of it. Jasmine tried to contact me as well, at least until she learned that Elliot's bank accounts had been frozen and their application for a downtown apartment had been denied due to his suddenly precarious financial situation. One day, I returned to the house to pack some personal belongings and found Elliot slumped at the kitchen table, his face gaunt and hollow-looking. "They froze my accounts," he said without looking up. "The bank called my employer." Jasmine left. I said nothing in response. He looked at me with completely empty eyes, then stood and left without another word. Caroline kept me updated as the legal proceedings moved forward. At the first hearing, Elliot showed up with a young lawyer who looked nervous and inexperienced. The judge, an older African-American woman with silver braids, didn't waste time with pleasantries. "The prenuptial agreement stands," she announced firmly. "Assets remain frozen. Mrs. Langston retains the house and the bulk of joint assets until the final ruling." I walked out of the courtroom while Elliot sat there looking completely stunned by the turn of events. Savannah is a small town when it wants to be, and whispers followed me wherever I went. But I focused on what truly mattered: Sophia, my future, and my own peace of mind. I rented a small office space on Jones Street and opened my own financial consulting firm called Langston Transitions. My first clients were women like me, some lost, some angry, all ready to rebuild their lives from the ground up. Each success story, each new client file became a piece of my own restoration and healing. Sophia started her new job in Charleston, and she called every night to tell me about her days, the exciting new city, and her dreams for the future. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said during one of our conversations, "for showing up even when it's hard." We spent weekends wandering through Forsyth Park, laughing together and slowly letting the old pain loosen its grip on our hearts. The final hearing came on a gray September morning. The courtroom was quiet and solemn. The judge was firm and decisive. Caroline laid out everything methodically: the evidence, the finances, the complete breach of trust. Elliot's new attorney tried to appeal for sympathy, but the judge wasn't moved by emotional manipulation. "Mrs. Langston retains the marital home, retirement accounts, and 70% of all investments," the judge announced. "Mr. Langston is awarded only personal property and a small portion of cash for essential expenses." Elliot stared at his hands, completely defeated. After the verdict was read, I walked out into the warm sunlight. Caroline shook my hand professionally, then left me alone with my thoughts and my newfound freedom. I walked down the sidewalk with the city alive and bustling around me, and felt something profound settle inside my chest. Not victory or revenge, but the cool certainty of being completely free. Weeks passed, and my business grew steadily. My reputation spread quietly throughout the community, not for what I had survived, but for the quality of work I provided. Sophia came home for the holidays, and one evening as we sat together on the front porch, she squeezed my hand. "We're okay, Mama," she said softly. "We made it through." One afternoon in late October, the phone rang in my office. It was Elliot. I let it ring twice before answering. "Ava," he said, his voice low and subdued. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for all of it. For everything." There was a long silence between us, filled with the weight of everything that had been lost and could never be recovered. "I know," I replied, my voice even and calm. "Take care of yourself, Elliot." The days grew shorter as autumn painted the squares and parks of Savannah in shades of gold and amber. I watched the leaves fall from my office window, coffee cup in hand, and thought about all I had lost and all I had found: peace, purpose, and most importantly, my own self back in my own hands. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals come disguised as ordinary moments. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us deepest. But sometimes, if we're prepared and strong enough, we can turn those moments of destruction into opportunities for complete transformation. I learned that dignity isn't about never falling down, it's about how gracefully you stand back up. I learned that love isn't about holding on to someone who doesn't value you, it's about loving yourself enough to let them go. And I learned that sometimes, the envelope you've been carrying in your purse for months, the one filled with legal papers and uncomfortable truths, can become the key to unlocking the life you were always meant to live. The graduation day that was supposed to celebrate my daughter's achievement became the day I graduated into a new version of myself. And in the end, that might have been the most valuable education of all.